Hello viewer, we're back in Kerbal Space Program. This picks up shortly after the last video ended. I actually made a little bit of a mistake after the last video in that I loaded up a previous save while I was in orbit around the moon to find out whether or not that texture issue that I was having was caused by a faulty mod, and it turns out that it was. However, once I got there I realized, I can't advance time back to after I'd landed, so I had to redo the re-entry and landing. This is pretty much exactly where I left off. There's been a couple of things that I've done here. First off, there was a active mission to test the Ant engine on the launch pad, so I did that. That cleared up another slot, and I got these two Explore the Moon missions. One is to land on the moon, and it gave me an advance, and the other one's to plant a flag on the moon, and that also gave me a nice advance. So now my cash is up to about 520,000. I don't intend to actually land on the moon. I intend to land on Minmus, but the extra cash is handy, and eventually there will be a moon landing involved. I've also got a ton of science points, which I could open up new items on here, but rather than doing that, I'm going to try to do the Minmus launch just based on what I had unlocked. There's a few different options here. There would be heavy rocketry to get larger engines. Fuel systems would get me stuff like fuel pipes and larger tanks, which would allow me to do like a 2.5 meter rocket stack. Those will lift heavier loads. They have more delta V. All sorts of things like that. Other stuff that I could do would be advanced electrics, which gives me deployable solar panels. They're a little bit more efficient than the little stick-on ones. Bigger batteries, things like that. Miniaturization would give me small docking ports, which I don't need at this particular point. Would also give me some of these science things like this monitor. I believe there's a power station, and if you have a scientist landed on a moon or other body, you can start deploying some of these science instruments, and you can pick up more science there. But I believe the ability just to take surface samples and the basic stuff is enough for the first trip to Minmus. And then there's other stuff like weather analyzers, smaller decouplers, flight control, which gives you fins, which gives you advanced flight control. This is reaction control blocks and monopropellant tanks, as well as a two-person pod. Now this would be extremely handy for doing orbital rescues and for doing the tourist missions. So this is something that I may have to do at some point. However, it's 190 to unlock this, 45 for that. So it would be 135 for the pair of these. And really, what you unlock, stuff like the Airstream protector shells, those are basically just fairings, things like that. It really depends on what you're interested in doing in the program itself. Now, I've started building a rocket, which was a modification of the Minmus lander that I did a couple of episodes ago. And that was the one that I tried to cut down to 30 pieces or less, and I wasn't able to do it and still have enough delta V. Essentially what I've done is I've added a little bit more fuel to this upper stage. So it's got a little larger fuel tank. And then the top stage here is exactly the same. So if I undo the decoupler here, that's the actual lander itself. I've got almost 2,200 meters of delta V in that stage for the landing and for getting back to Kerbin. This one here, whoops. This one here would be my transfer stage. I've got about 1,900 meters per second on that to get me from essentially to get me to Minmus. And then I've also exchanged the solid boosters over for liquid fuel boosters because that gives me considerably more delta V. However, they are much more expensive than the solid fuel boosters. So I've got 6 of those on there. The staging is set up exactly the same as it was before. 6 boosters firing, and then I decouple those, kick them away from the craft, fire the mid stack, and I've gone also 1 extra fuel tank up on that. No, actually I think it was 2. So it's a little bit taller, and my thrust to weight ratio is slightly, well, it's 1.0. So that means that I can't gain speed, but I won't actually lose speed either. And hopefully by the time I'm using that, I'm starting to get into my gravity turn, and I'm picking up horizontal velocity, and I don't so much need the vertical speed anymore. So there hasn't been a huge number of changes to this rocket, but there's been a few, and the total build cost is under 50,000, under 40,000 actually. So that's not too bad, and I think now we're going to try and launch it, and we're going to see whether or not we can get to Minmus with this. Alright, so here we are on the pad. And my mute chatter, as cool as it is, it's a little distracting to listen to. And this SAS turned on, engine throttled up, and that's it. I believe we're ready to launch. And next stop should be orbit. And you can see that the fuel is lasting considerably longer in this than it was in the solid boosters. It burns through them pretty quickly. And I'm still going to try and stay completely vertical before I kick those stages loose, because if I'm trying to do my gravity turn while I'm into that with these boosters on, I'm likely to have one of the boosters hit the central stack and destroy the rocket. I haven't actually tested this design yet, so we'll soon find out whether or not this is going to be a good design or not. Okay, they peeled off quite nicely. And I have more than enough altitude to do my gravity turn. My AP is already up at 170 kilometers, so I really need to start getting some horizontal velocity going on. And this stage should have enough to actually achieve orbit, enough delta V. So those boosters were probably slightly over-designed. I probably could have gone with less fuel in those and kicked them off a little sooner. And you can see one of the hazards of a long skinny rocket like this is I'm getting some flex on it. It's made with a lot of short fuel tank segments. And apparently I was wrong about getting in orbit. But this will, because we only have to hit 2200 for orbit. Alright, it's not a pretty orbit, 265 by 77 kilometers, but it's an orbit. So let's go look at our situation in the map. Now, one other interesting thing is depending on, we're going to Minmus, depending on where it is, if you schedule your transfer at the right time, you can actually hit it when it's close to the ascending node and descending node. So you can see that it's in an inclined orbit as compared to Kerbin and as compared to the moon. So when you launch up, you're running along the equator. The moon is easy to get to because that's running at a nice flat orbit. So you don't normally have to do orbital inclination. However, to get to Minmus, it's running on this incline, and you can see here that if you were to try and launch when it's at this point of the orbit, you have to get that much further off the orbital plane, and on the opposite side you have to drop down below the orbital plane. But if you schedule your launch so that you get to Minmus just as it's crossing the orbital plane, then you won't have to deal with the change of inclination on your orbit. And that's an example of the launch windows that NASA has to deal with in terms of like when to do their launches, because while Kerbin has no inclination of its rotation on the planet, like its north and south poles are basically up and down as compared to the to its orbital plane, so it has no seasons. Earth is tilted over, I think it's about 15 degrees if I remember. So the orbit, or the equator, is actually running at a bit of a diagonal, and depending on what time of year you're launching at, you're going to have to launch either straight east or slightly to the southeast or slightly to the northeast, and to get you into what's on the orbital plane as regards to, say, the moon or to the sun, which would be used to get you to a different planet. Anyways, yeah, that's one of the things that as you play the game, you'll find out that there are certain times where it might be advantageous to maybe delay a launch until one of the bodies that you're going to is in a somewhat better location. But of course, with Kerbals, you don't have to worry so much about that because you can afford to burn the extra fuel for them to do orbital adjustments and that sort of thing. Closest approach is 5,200 kilometers. 6,900. And I'm just trying to find a spot where I won't have to tweak the thing too much. 2,300. Okay, so you see now I can get an encounter with Minmus without actually changing my orbital inclination. Now, it's probably not going to be a particularly close one, but I'm also only 800, or yeah, about 820 meters per second of delta V. So I'm not needing a lot of delta V to get there. 700. So this is actually almost really not much more than what it would take me to get to the moon. And this is trying to do a second path around. That's what the blue one is. The primary one is my first orbit, and the secondary one would be that. Now I think what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to launch on that because that's not too bad for delta V. My only problem is that I'm actually below Minmus's orbit, and I have a lot more velocity than I need to because I'm swinging out past it. But once I get sort of along this path here, I can do a burn for normal plus, and I can actually bring myself up a little bit, and I can get this PE to a little bit closer than 765. The problem is right now if I try to adjust that, what I'm doing is I'm actually adjusting the tilt because I'm on the opposite side of Kerbin for that, and so I need to wait until I'm around here so that pulling up that orbit is actually going to get me a closer intercept with Minmus. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense the way that I'm explaining, but you know, to adjust this path, it's basically it's not really helping what I'm trying to do here. I don't think. Yeah, that didn't really do anything for me. The only thing that it's affecting is my my second orbit around. So I'm still at 760, so I've got 26 minutes before I have to do this burn. And if you recall, the moon was about 800 meters per second away, or 840 or something like that. So this requires very little additional delta V in order to get there. Now, one thing that I have to be a little bit careful of is that I don't get a moon encounter as well. And it looks like I sort of do, but it's not going to have much. It's not going to have an effect on my course. It's going to be like 2,000 kilometers away. So let's zoom in here, and I'll just time warp us around until we're almost ready for this. Almost ready for this maneuver, and then we'll head for Minmus. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Warp here, not add maneuver. I already have a maneuver. And this little thing, the capsule up there, is kind of screwing me around, because I keep looking at the wrong one. Okay, so now I need to line up with my maneuver node. And as you level Jeb up, you'll actually get, or any of your pilots actually, you'll actually get a an option to lock on to the node marker, as opposed to just prograde and retrograde. And one thing that I'd never noticed about this is you see how nice and smooth this projected path is, and then the second time around it seems a lot more like it's straight lines, and then this one is a lot more straight lines connected by points, so you actually end up losing resolution the further out you get with your course projections. Oh crap, I should have gone... I was a little late on starting my burn. Hopefully that'll put us close to where we need to be anyways. Okay, that's probably going to be close enough or no? Okay, so that says that I do have an encounter coming up. PE's at 1700. Okay, and at this point I'm probably running a little too much power on the engine here, so I'm going to limit this down a little bit to give me a bit more precision. And that actually doesn't look too terribly bad. Now you can see what's happening is I'm coming out along this path, and then because I'm a little bit below Minmus, it's going to incline my orbit a little bit because the gravity of the planet is going to pull me up a little. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little further along on my path to about here, and then I'm going to try to use some radial up, or sorry, try to use some normal up to get my path a little bit higher along the curve here. And that would put me at about 305, but it's only going to take 4 meters per second, or almost 5 meters per second. So that puts me a little bit closer to its actual path. Now this is where I was going. This is where I'm going to go now. So that's a little closer to being in line with the altitude of Minmus once I get out there. So I've got 2 hours before I get to that point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to align with the node, and then I'm going to it's still trying to lock on a prograde. That's why it's giving me issues. It's fighting with the controls. And I think I'm going to turn my engine power down a little bit more because it's only 5 meters a second. Excuse me. Now I don't want to sit here for the next 2 hours to do that, so I'm just going to warp to this location. Still 50 minutes away. Minutes away. At this point, I'm just going to do the time warp manually. And honestly, because it's such a small duration burn, I don't even really need to worry about it being that precise. And you can see the blue line picking up and our PE getting a little more in line with where the where Minmus is going to be. Okay, now our PE is still 300 kilometers away. And I think I can probably do better. So for that I can pull radial, which is towards the inside of the circle. .210. Now actually I'm probably not even going to use the maneuver. I just wanted to point me to the correct, like whether I want to be at radial or anti-radial on the nav ball. And then I'm going to burn this thing manually, and I'm just going to watch the PE as I do it. So you can see that it's going down. I'm getting closer to the moon. It can be a little freaky when you see these lines moving around on your screen like that. And we'll get this down to ideally about 100 kilometers. All right, good enough. So we got a periapsis at just under 100 kilometers. Now let's warp to just before our transition. Now we're still doing good for electric charge. We have a ton of delta V. We're going to get there and get into orbit, and we're probably going to undock and still have some fuel in that stage. Okay, so we're now in the Minmus sphere of influence. Now, probably the first thing to do would be to do a crew report, because we're high over the surface of Minmus, and there it is off in the distance. And that's going to be worth some science, and we can transmit that back. 12.5 science. Now, here's an interesting thing, and I think it's probably going to fail. Electric charge is at 350, so we try to transmit that. And it says that we have no usable comm devices in range. However, the antenna that I put is definitely long enough range to be able to reach Kerbin. The issue is that it has to actually be deployed first. Normally you would, the antenna would extend automatically because it detects that you're within range of Kerbin. And now you can see that, let me just snap that thing back in. Retract antenna. So you can see that I don't have a connection, and then as soon as I extend it, I do have a connection, so I can then transmit whatever I need to back to Kerbin. And that should have gained me another little bit of science points. Now the next thing is an EVA report, high over Kerbin. Sorry, high over Minmus. Words are hard sometimes. And that's where science 2. Of course, I can't transmit from out here, so we'll keep that. We'll reboard the craft. And then we can review the data. And because it transmits at 100%, I can transmit it. Now, if I was only getting partial, then I'd simply wait till I got back in order to get the full value of it. And we transmit that. And you can see that it does burn a fair amount of electricity doing that. But I do have electricity coming back into the system because I've got these solar panels mounted. I'm maybe not ideally facing the sun, and that's where the more advanced solar panels that have their own tracking are pretty handy. but it's good enough for this particular application. And what I'm doing is I'm reorienting the craft a little bit. To get it to recharge a little bit faster. So I'm basically just making it so that I'm at 0.3 electricity per second, I guess it is. First flyby of Minmus for scientific data. So that gave me a little bit of science, but it also gave me a bunch more cash for the next mission. And now we can go to the map screen, and we can plan our orbital insertion. And for that, we just add retrograde until this thing turns into a circle. So that's going to take 190 meters a second. And we've still got 770, so we're going to enter orbit with about 500 meters a second of delta V still left in the tank, and we'll do a little bit of orbital adjustment and things like that. Now, I think we should probably, at this point, warp up to this point. And retrograde and the maneuver will be at the same spot. Oh, and I've turned my engine power down. I might as well put that back up. That's why it's telling me I'm going to need such a long burn. We don't care about this anymore. Now we're just dropping down to a reasonable altitude. Now the next thing is to start planning for a landing area. I want to land on the flats here, and there's a few of them to choose from. So ideally I'd like to land here, and I'd like to land here. So I'm going to try to change the orbital inclination. Whoops, wrong one. Now I don't know whether this is going to show as another biome or not, but that looks as though I should be able to hit probably 3 of these spots. Now the reason that you want to go here as opposed to the moon is these flat areas here are like they're completely flat. And if you land near the edge of one of them, you can jetpack over to the adjacent area, and that's considered a different biome. So if I can do a landing here, that will be considered, I think it's one biome, but I'm not sure. It may be part of this one, but I know that these two are separate biomes. And the idea is you can pull surface samples from multiple biomes, and you'll get a bunch more science on one trip. So this looks like it should allow me for the 3 different spots, and then maybe we can do one a landing on one of these spots as well. So that takes care of that. Now the next thing is we need to get back to retrograde, and we need to pull our orbit down a little bit more. So just under 20 kilometers. And I don't know if this is still considered high over Minmus or if I can do another crew report and EVA report from here. Space high over Minmus. We'll see about the EVA report. I don't think it detects biomes at this altitude. Nope. So we got 45 minutes until we get to the periapsis. And we'll turn our lights on just to make it a little easier to find this thing. Oh. I don't get the rest of the options here because I'm in time warp. I was wondering about that. As much as time as I've spent playing this game, sometimes things still trip me up on it a little bit. So if you're a new player and you're having a little bit of trouble getting a handle on it, don't feel too bad. It has a steep learning curve, and even if you play it a lot and extensively, it's something you're constantly learning on. Okay, so I should be low enough to get an EVA report from this area and have it biome applicable, just above the greater flats. We'll keep that. We'll board. And I don't have line of sight to Kerbin, so I can't transmit that back yet. So yeah, I guess the greater flats are on the back side. I'm not going to try to do a night landing here. Considering I have no lights equipped on this craft, that probably wouldn't be a good idea. And the next trip here is going to be with probably a more elaborate craft. I don't think I'm going to do a video of it, but at the end of this video I'm probably going to load up another save, and I'll show you a few examples of the sort of thing that you can do. Just sort of an inspiration type thing. Okay, we're actually at PE, so I should be doing a retrograde burn to lower my orbit a little bit more. Okay, 17 and 20. That's not too insane. And this has got to be a different biome. Just above the Midlands. Excellent. And now I can transmit data back. Excellent. Now at this point I can start planning ahead for the landing. Oh, and you see as the moon has been turning, it's actually taken this out of my orbital path. So I could readjust for that, or I could just settle for 3 biomes for landings, or maybe do a hop over to this one. You really want to be careful about getting too greedy. In fact, a good point at this, a good thing to do here would be to save the game. And that way, if anything goes terribly wrong, you crash, you do something stupid, whatever, you don't lose all the time that you spent in getting here. And this should hopefully be the Highlands. Still the Midlands. How interesting. Okay, now at this point we should probably start planning for a landing. So that means that it's finally time to kick this stage loose. I hate to give up that much fuel, but it can't be helped. So SAS on, retrograde, back to the map. Now if I burn according to this, it should drop us right there, but I think what I'm probably going to have happen is it's going to put us a little bit closer to the to this side of the flat area. Now what's our thrust to weight? 29. That seems excessively high, so I'm definitely going to drop that down a little bit. 5-1. Okay. So there's where we're hoping to land. And that's a little backwards for me. Now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to orient this thing so that my WASD gives me a little bit more intuitive control over it. So 2 minutes and I start to do my retro burn. And if I push W, it pitches the craft. And I can use either the window on the top of it or the antenna as my marker for which way I need to be oriented. Actually, that almost seems backwards. We'll try that. In fact, smart thing to do, save again that we're doing a landing. And almost time for the burn. Now we're going to stay pointed at retrograde. And that did, I guess because of the delay on firing that thing, it did bring us a little bit closer away from that edge. So we're probably going to end up a little closer to this edge. And now for the scary part. Now you'll notice that our speed is increasing because we're dropping down towards the surface. Gravity has got us, and that can be a bit of an issue with the moon. Like, it's got much higher gravity, so you tend to spend a lot more of your fuel fighting your gravity. And because I know we're going to end up coming a little too close to this side of the plane, I'm going to actually go kind of vertical towards the ground, and as I use the thrust on it, it'll actually extend our course a little bit further out. So it'll drop us a little further down here. And you can see that this thing is moving. It's not moving particularly quickly, though. And this is a combination of horizontal as well as vertical speed. And now we can snap back to retrograde. And this is something I'm not sure I would necessarily recommend, is going into time warp while you're doing an approach like this. Typically, if you've come this far, you've got the time to burn to just watch it play out at its normal speed. Oh, and I better switch that to radar altimeter. And you can see that I got a fair amount of horizontal speed on. As soon as I kick back to retrograde, it'll start killing that. And then we'll start to drop a lot more vertically. You'll see the nav ball will come closer to the top. And you want to try to land at under 5 meters a second. So what I'm doing is I'm going full throttle and then no throttle to just kind of get a feel for how many seconds it takes to eliminate, say, 10 meters a second. So we get to about 20. And that took us about 200 meters in order to bleed off that 10 meters a second. So I take about 400 from this speed. .500 meters from here. And as you can see, it's a pretty ideal landing spot. Come down on a hillside like that, and you can end up landing, do a perfect landing, and then have your craft fall over. And when you spend all this time getting here, that can be kind of a depressing thing. Now you notice once you get below a certain speed, you lose the ability to hold prograde. Which is a good thing, or retrograde rather, which is a good thing because it used to be where you'd get slowed down to a certain point and then retrograde was suddenly on top of you because you'd start to go up again, and next thing you know it flips your craft around, points your nose at the ground. And we're down. We're on Minmus, and we've pulled off a successful landing. So the next thing is you want to do a Eve Surf crew report, obviously. And we can transmit that. And then it's time for an EVA. Now I think this is just going to be considered, yeah, from the lesser flats. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Actually, I'm going to put it back in the craft. EVA. Alright, one small step for a Kerbal. Now, one of the things that you would have had to do in order to give yourself the ability to take surface samples is also be able to plant flags. And normally what I'll do is I'll plant a flag whenever I land in a spot so that I know that I've already been there and I've taken a surface sample. So this is the lesser flats. I'm going to just name the flag that. And we're also going to take a surface sample. And that's worth 150 science. Now, it's worth considerably less if you take a surface sample on the moon, which is why we came to Minmus in the first place. So, first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put that surface sample back inside the ship. RCS active. Now you can see that this jetpack has a ton of power for moving you around. It'll get you off the ground on the moon too. And this is why we didn't worry about putting a ladder onto this thing. And now we board. And that stores the surface sample. And we EVA. And this time, we're heading for the next biome. Oops. Now you see your prograde marker. Depending on whether that's above or below the horizon mark, that'll tell you whether you're rising or whether you're falling. You can also look at your vertical speed indicator, and by giving little taps on the shift, which is by default up, you can keep yourself in level flight. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to get to just far enough into this other biome. Let's align the camera. And then we'll plant, if it does get us into something other than the lesser flats, which it should, because you don't have to get very far off the flats for that, we'll plant another flag, take another surface sample, and that's another 150 science. Now, it's not too late to kill your Kerbal, so even though you're out cruising around with a jetpack, it's not necessarily the safest thing in the world. Or even off the world. Alright, what do we have here? EVA report. Minmus lowlands, okay. Awesome. Now we'll plant another flag. Not going to bother with text. We'll take a surface sample. Another 150 science. And now we're ready to head back to the ship. And when you enter back into the ship, your fuel for your jetpack will get recharged. Oh, and actually it's not the horizon line on the nav ball that indicates whether you're rising or falling. It's this little line here. Alright, so we have a successful EVA, we have a ton of science on board, another 300 of that. Now, the next thing to look at is, I believe, if we wanted to go to the dam that's dark over there. I was going to say the next biome, but that seems crazy. So what we might be able to do is head to the west, over here, and that should maybe drop us into that. I suspect it's still the lowlands, but I don't think... Yeah, we could go to the Greater Flats. That's maybe a little brighter, and that would be sort of southwest. So first we figure out what direction we need. I think off in this direction here. Nope, we gotta go more to the left. Navigation is a little bit tricky on this. Okay, I'm going to go with that. So we're going to do a hop up to 60 kilometers, and then we're back down. And you can see that it didn't take very much to get off the ground. We still got 1,400 meters of delta V, so that's plenty to do another landing. We've planted our little flag down there. And yeah, I suspect that's also part of the lesser flats. And I think this would probably be the midland, so I'm not going to bother trying to land on that, because that would be the same as the second flag that I did there. The reason that I try to land in those flats and right near the edge is because then you can generally just jetpack over, as opposed to taking the craft off again. So we'll time accelerate that a little bit. And I think while I'm up here, maybe I'm going to try to transmit some data, if we have any that can go without loss. And the reason for that is because if I do a second EVA report from the same spot, then that would also transmit or give me science, but to a lesser degree. And we're already pretty high up in the science. And we're doing pretty good for cash because we've landed. We didn't take missions for any of this stuff, but it still pays you with science points, reputation, and of course the all-important cash. Back to the map, and I could probably do a bit of a course adjustment here. I'm trying to bring us more into the southern portion. So the purple ones are normal up and down. That's basically raising and lowering in relation to your orbit, like burning up or down. The blue ones are radial in and out. So that basically twists your orbit this way or twists it out this way. And then of course prograde and retrograde are along the axis of your orbit. And you can see that this is drifting closer to the edge. So what I want to do is go retrograde and pull that back in a little bit. And it's basically because the moon is turning as we're taking the time to follow our path. And I think we'll go back and adjust to normal again a little bit to take us further south. Whoops, wrong one. And some more retrograde. And that should be an ideal landing spot. Oh. Damn it. Those of you that have been paying attention may have realized what I forgot on my last landing. A couple of very important details. And those of you that are too wrapped up in the moment probably didn't realize, but I've got 2 of these goo canisters on there, and I should have used one of them at the previous landing spot. Basically, any place you put your ship down is a good idea to use one of those, and I could have also taken barometric pressure and temperature. Well, I guess I might as well take one in space near Minmus. Since this will be the final landing. Okay, landing trajectory still looks good. And there is mods that you can get, Kerbal Engineer and MechJub, that will tell you what your suicide burn altitude is, or time to suicide burn rather. And basically what that means is if you go full throttle at that time, it'll bring you to a halt just as you get to the ground. And it constantly calculates based on the amount of fuel that you've got, your remaining delta V, your thrust, all the rest of that kind of stuff. However, I'm not doing this with mods, so I don't have that advantage. I'm just sort of eyeballing it. Now you may be noticing it took us about 800 delta V to get here, whereas we're down to about 1200 and we still have to leave orbit. That's not really a problem because it doesn't take much to leave orbit of Minmus. So I should only need about 300 to manage that. And there's actually a bit of a mistake on the staging where when I cut the capsule loose, it's also going to deploy the parachute. That's definitely not what I want to do. And that's why it's a good idea to save on your way back to Kerbin. You know, sort of at every stage of the process, and then if something does go wrong, you can just reload it before you screw up. Auto-saving. How about that? I didn't realize this game auto-saved. And assuming you're doing a landing in light, you can generally use your shadow to give you a little bit of a feel for your altitude. I mean, not that the altimeter doesn't do it. But at particularly low altitudes, it's a very intuitive way to see how close to the ground you're getting. And if you look, you can see that I'm dropping delta V very slowly here. You'd be going through this a lot faster on the moon. So once you get down to a reasonably low altitude, you can basically just maintain your speed and then slowly cut it as you're starting to get a little closer to the ground. Hammer down again. Crew report. So we are in a greater flats, and we will transmit that. And we observe the goo. Huh, surprising that's only worth 50 data. Science. And EVA report. And we plant the flag here for greater flats. And you only have one flag on you, so you can't plant one and then go somewhere else and plant the second. Surface sample. And now we want to take the data from the temperature and barometric pressure. Now, I don't know whether or not the adjoining biome here is going to be the Midlands again, but it's close enough to fly over and give it a try. And actually, we might as well log this data as well because we did it in flight. Log pressure data, 60. So those are worth almost as much as a goo container. Look how much smaller they are. And I can remove them as many times as I want to. Now, I'm not sure this was the closest edge, but I guess it doesn't matter. It's reasonably fast travel with the jetpack. In fact, some people would say 100 meters a second is maybe too fast. Alright, EVA report. Do we have this one? Yes, we do. Which means that I don't think a surface sample is going to give us anything else. Surface sample from the lowlands. And I thought our other one was for the lowlands as well. Yeah, so I may not get anything out of that except for the greater flats. Alright, back to the ship. Time to head back to Kerbin. And 7 kilometers, that's a pretty decent little excursion. And the reason that there's 2 markers, an orange one, or sort of a purple one and a blue one, one's the flag and one's the ship. And I'm using both hands on the keyboard for that. That's why it doesn't look like I'm flying all that well. Okay, dump experiments. You know what? I forgot to grab the experiments for the pressure and temperature. And I'm hoping that I can grab more of that stuff. The last ones I did were low orbit. So I'm hoping at high altitude I can grab them again. Take data. Collect data. All right. Time to head back for Kerbin. So, I'm going that way. Now, it should actually be possible to get escape velocity without going through orbit first. And that should be to my east. Now normally what you'd want to do is you'd want to enter orbit and then go retrograde towards, with relation to Minmus's orbit. And just in case I'm doing this wrong, I should save again. Because there may be some fundamental misunderstanding that I'm having here. Okay, so I do have a escape from Minmus. That's going to put me into a very large orbit. I'd then do a Kerbin escape. So this may have been a bad idea. We'll find out. In fact, let's just warp on over there. Oh, you know what? Let's, what am I forgetting now? Pressure data, maybe? Yes. Might as well grab all the science we can. We're already over 600. Okay, so now we want to go retrograde. And we should be able to simply burn retrograde and drop our PE down into the atmosphere. Look at that, not even 200, and it looks like we're going to get low enough. So I'm just going to manually burn this. I'm not going to bother using the maneuver node. And I'm just going to watch this PE. 24,000, 23. And I don't have to worry about inclination at all because we're already caught in Kerbin's gravity field. So it doesn't really matter whether I come in straight along the equator or anything of that type. That was a moon encounter there. That's why it kind of freaked out a little bit. $4,000 kilometers. Okay, 150 kilometer PE. So that's going to drop us down to the planet pretty quick. And I'm going to drop that down to about 45. And you can see this prediction, that's what the aero braking is going to do, dropping into the atmosphere. But because I'm going to dump that final stage with all its mass, I don't think we're even going to get another orbit out of it. I think we're just going to end up coming around the planet. Okay, so at that point, I'm pretty much committed to return to Kerbin. Any crew reports to do? No. So I'm going to EVA and I'm going to pull that last little bit of data, and then we can fast forward to Kerbin. Oh, and I've got my thruster set way too high, so it makes it awkward to control. By turning it down, I get much more precise control over the jetpack. And the spacesuit lights, if you haven't figured it out, are either that or U. Alright, that should be it. And that should be our final operation. We'll warp to here. Now, I could, I suppose, transmit any data to the surface just in case this goes terribly wrong. I have plenty of power, view stored data, but only stuff that's going to give me 100%. Otherwise, I just keep the data. So this one I can transmit because it's an EVA report. I get 100% value for it. Alright, I think we're ready to kick loose that booster stage. We had a surplus of delta V. We didn't need to use it all. But it's always nice to have too much rather than too little. We'll go SAS on. And we'll kick that out parallel or perpendicular to our path. I'm just going to make sure that when I stage it, it doesn't do anything crazy. Alright, so the final stage is going to be the parachute. Face retrograde. And we're ready for re-entry. And it will come out of time warp as soon as you hit atmosphere. And you can see that I'm getting atmospheric drag, so it's going from 40,000 kilometers and bringing down my apoasis. And if I check the resources, I've got 100 ablator. But that should be enough to bleed off this kind of speed. And you can see that the final stage is entering the atmosphere and it's exploding. And that's why you kick it out to the side of your path, not in line with. We're down to 1,000 kilometers, 1,700. And I am actually climbing a little bit here, but I'm wondering whether or not this is going to get out of the atmospheric drag before it pulls this down inside the atmosphere. Yeah, looks like I might be going for another orbit. But that's not a big deal because the next one will be the one that lands us. What's happened here is that I didn't dip in quite low enough, so I'm still going to do 600, maybe 550 for the AP, because I am still bleeding off a little bit of velocity. But I'm so high in the atmosphere that I'm not bleeding it fast enough. And that's just kind of a guessing game. I figured 45 would be enough, but I had enough speed that it just didn't give me enough drag. But it's no big deal. Okay, now because I started that warp, it wouldn't allow me to warp fast enough, or warp more than four times. And down we go again. And if I'm lucky, I might even end up landing on solid ground, which would allow me to take a surface sample somewhere here. Now, of course, this is turning into a fairly long video, but it does show you basically all the steps that are involved in a trip to Minmus and the return and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So hopefully it's worth the time you spend watching it. And you can see this time I've got a much lower velocity. I was about 3,100 if I remember right last time. And once again, the heat shield that I was using had 100 ablator to start with. We're down to a little over 30. So I guess that was a pretty good guess. And we're going deep enough in the atmosphere that there's no way we're getting back out. And it looks like we're coming in overland for a change. Which can be good, but if you land on the side of a mountain and you roll down the mountain and your ship destructs, well, that's less good. And you notice that we're still running fairly parallel to the ground. I think I mentioned that in the first video, that you generally want to try to come in as flat as possible because that gives you more atmosphere to go through, which slows you down. And theoretically I'm slow enough to deploy the chute, but I got plenty of altitude, so I can afford to drop the speed down to maybe 250 or so. Maybe not, 10 kilometers. So it's giving me a warning here. If it went to full deployment, it might damage the chute. And I think I'm going to leave it for 1,000 meters for full deployment since we're coming down on the ground. And I guess I've never done a crew report over the Highlands, which means it's almost certain I've never done an EVA report over the Highlands. That's pretty good, some lone little bush out here. And look at that, out of 100 ablative, I'm down to 1.47. So that was actually a really good guess, I suppose. And you can actually jettison this heat shield, and that will reduce the mass of your craft, but of course then you'll get paid slightly less for the vessel recovery. Alright, so since I haven't been here, I'm going to EVA, and I'm going to take a surface sample. It ain't worth much, but it's worth science. And the all-important debrief. So I got 822 science out of this mission. I'm at a total of 1479, so that will unlock a ton of stuff in the tech tree. I think I started with about 500,000, so I made a couple of 100,000 on the mission, just through milestones and things like that. And as you may recall, I think it was about 37,000 to build the ship. So a decent little profit margin on this. That would also fund, would fund a much larger ship or a space station or something along those lines. And Jeb planted a flag on another planet, so he got to level 2. And if I remember right, that gives him some extra options to automatically align on. Now, if I was to do another trip back there, I would probably use Valentina to level her up a little bit as well. Anyways, that was my trip to Minmus, and I hope it was somewhat informative to you. You don't necessarily have to follow along exactly the way that I did it, but it should give you some pointers for doing your own flights there. And as I'd said previously, Minmus, because of its lower gravity and the large flat areas, is much easier to land on than the moon, and doesn't take a lot of extra fuel to get there, even though it might seem a little bit more intimidating at first. So I would do a Minmus trip first, and then start thinking about maybe a moon landing, and then possibly even advance on to other planets. Anyways, I'm going to leave that it for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it informative, and come back for the next one.